Been updated. Yay.
I hope that worked. Anyways.
The level of confidence in our platform is amazing.
Pat finished his homework. He also says, welcome back. Hey, Pat, how's it going?
Hola.
So,
Ciao, or whichever language you prefer. That's all I got, so.
He's from, Czech, so I have no idea how you say it.
I actually don't know.
I think they have...
I actually don't know what the national
language
of the Czech Republic is.
Right.
Nothing at all.
New name, Fedora of Writers. Well, we could get you a fedora.
My head's not on fire, though.
What are you saying about the fedora? I have hot coffee here. We can fix that.
It looks good on you.
I think you could pull off the fedora. So, anyways, good to hear you're doing great, Pat. So, last week we talked about mortality. For our Valentine's Day episode, we talked about massacres and mortality in fiction.
Because, let's face it, neither of us are exactly romantics.
No. I mean...
And neither of us read romances, so that was the other issue.
That's the thing, like... We could argue that I'm romantic when I need to be, but I'm in a perfectly happy relationship, so I don't tend to do the serial romance thing. And I don't go looking at romance novels because that's not my scene. So, we talked about massacres and mortality.
Of course.
Because that's the second subject of Valentine's Day. The main language in Czech Republic is Czech.
We're idiots.
I said I thought they had their own language. I'm giving myself a pass here.
You did not name the language, however.
I mean, I would call it Czech. Other people call it Czech. But that doesn't mean that Americans are always right on the actual names of what we're talking about.
Ask Spain about that sometime.
Yeah! So anyway, so the assignment we gave ourselves last week was to pick a series, and kill off a character in it in a way that made the series better, in a way that we thought made the series better at the very least.
Yeah.
Or
at least more interesting.
And there were a ton of possibilities for this that I thought about. I think I'm gonna just launch right into this if
Go ahead.
I'm good. So I went at this project. It's more of a study, more of a short write your summation. But I went into this trying to think of a lot of things that I could do, and when I looked at it, I found a lot of the things I chose. It just completely changed the genre. Like, you know, you can't do comedies because that's gonna change the entire focus of it. You can do some action stuff, but like, Pat mentioned Pokemon, and like,
that doesn't really work with Pokemon style.
Right. Like, it doesn't work with Pokemon style. It wouldn't make the series better because everything else about Pokemon.
Yeah.
Is...
And we're not counting the one episode where Ash died. That doesn't count.
But what I eventually decided was that there were a lot of ways I could do this and just make it a throwaway thing, make it a joke. But if I wanted to do something to actually impact the series and not completely change it, I had to look for something with a certain tone. And what I ended up on was Bleach. My choice for a character to kill off would be Rukia at the end of the first Soul Society arc. I feel like if you kill off Rukia, first of all, Bleach is dark enough. It got lighter in tone as it went on, but it started out dark enough that you could totally kill off one of the main secondary characters and it would add a lot more weight and a lot more ire to Aizen being the antagonist of the arc. And I think that if we're pulling what we got from the project, I think that's what I pulled. That if you're gonna kill off a character, there are certain times to do it, and when you're wanting to make your villain more villainous is a great way to pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to take that risk. You got to take the risk to kill off someone big, but it can pay off in dividends. I think Joss Whedon's really good at that. Serenity stuff.
Mm-hmm. Of course, you also have to be careful that with the character you kill off, you pick the wrong character, you can make a villain more likable. Yay, I killed off the character I hate. Yay, he killed Jar Jar Binks. He's awesome.
Everyone says people in USA speak American, right?
Twitch. I think the English may not necessarily argue with that, but no one asked them.
So who is your character that you chose to pick off?
Well, I struggled with this one because, and I ran into some of the same issues you did. Either it completely changed the story, so I was left wondering where the hell do you go from here,
right? Or
it completely altered the genre to the point where, which again left the story pretty much unrecognizable. The character I eventually came up with was Sean, and major spoilers ahead, Sean from Fallout 4. If he's killed off after Kellogg takes him from the vault, and then the main character finds him dead, instead of finding him as the head of the Institute. Again, spoilers. But then again, when you're talking about a topic on death, you can't avoid spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no way around it. The conclusion I came to was it would impact the story because it would give the character a more personal reason to want to go after the Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Because as it stands in the main storyline, the Institute's kind of a lesser villain almost. They're not as in your face as they generally are. You have to really dig around to find some of the shit they pulled.
Right.
Whereas now you have a very real reason to hate their guts.
And that's kind of the thing with
But the downside I figured out to that was it basically removes the Institute as a faction you could side with, because now there is legit no reason for a sane character to want to work with the Institute.
And that's harder to do with an open game like Fallout, but I could see that a lot.
It made me worried that you would end up with a similar situation to like you had in Fallout 3, where you could at the end kind of do what the Enclave wants to do, but you had no reason that your character would ever actually want to help the Enclave in any way, shape, or form, or do what they want to do. But you could still do it because it's an open world game. It's like, it gives you you still have the option because it's an open world game, so you can do whatever you want, but it makes no sense from a storyline perspective.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and Fallout 4 was interesting because it had a good story to go along with the open world. Bethesda's actually pretty good at that. I think with the Fallout series more so than the Elder Scrolls series. But we have Pat made another joke, which I'm not even gonna touch. He says the character he killed was Hitler in his history book. Good choice.
Yeah.
Moving on. I think we can all agree.
I'm still sad you can't do that in Hearts of Iron 4. I would pay a lot of money for that option.
Wait. I think we can all agree that anti-Nazi is a stance that we've been taking for years. And it's a well-supported stance.
Yes.
There is absolutely no controversy around that.
No, none whatsoever. God.
If he died at World War I, it would have changed a lot. Yes.
Undoubtedly.
But, yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, alternate history gets things really interesting.
I mean, alternate histories can be really fun, though.
Oh, definitely.
Like, Nazi Germany won the war is actually...
Man in the High Castle. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philip K. Dick.
Dennis Kuznick says hi. Hi, Dennis. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Afternoon.
Um,
Yes.
so alternate histories.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites is the South wins the Civil War in America.
Which one? There's about a dozen of those.
It's one of my favorite premises.
Yes. I love
it. Which is a terrible premise, but it's wonderful material.
Yeah, the one time I've ever... Okay, the two times I've seen it done well, both were here by Harry Turtledove, which is one of my favorite alternate history writers. Even if he does have major characterization weaknesses. But his biggest issue... But he did two series on that. One was where a bunch of South African Afrikaners specifically, went back in time with AK-47s and then gave them to the South. This was a little more fanciful version of alternate history, let's just say.
Huh.
The second version was, and this was my favorite, whenever I hear the phrase alternate history, I always hear the whole for want of a nail phrase. This is my favorite example for want of a nail. Because right before the Battle of Antietam, in our timeline, a Southern courier lost orders to Robert E. Lee's generals. Those orders were picked up by the North. They figured out what was going on, and they were able to beat the North at the Battle of Antietam, which Lincoln was able to turn around, parlay into the Emancipation Proclamation a few months later.
That's cool.
The difference in their timeline was the messenger didn't lose the messages. Robert E. Lee ambushed the Army of the Potomac, crushed them at the river, and with the Army of the Northern Potomac completely smashed, there was no one left to defend Washington. So they were able to force the North into surrender. Specifically because England and France stepped in and offered their support to the South. End result was, and that was just the setup. Like, that wasn't even the alternate history. That was just a setup. The setup is, what if the United States then turns around and joins with Germany as part of World War I, because they are pissed off at England and France now.
Right.
And ends up with World War I happening on the home front.
Well, that's a pretty good transition point. Because
not our first rodeo.
Yeah. Talking about alternate histories, one of the best things that alternate histories do, I think, is take the world you know and use it as a framework. Going towards that point, we just had President's Day. So I thought we would take this week to talk about
which for our non-American non-American resident people is a day where we celebrate all our better presidents. We ignore the bad ones.
We had really nothing to celebrate this year. Everyone say hi to the cat.
Yes. No, we had to
shows you her butt.
Yeah. We have something to celebrate. He was labeled lower than James Buchanan, according to some historians, which for the non-Americans is a remarkable accomplishment.
This is Squeak. She is the owner of the apartment. She leases it out to us at a very reasonable price of squeaky toys and strings to kill. But yes. So I thought we would talk about we thought we would talk about our favorite times seeing real world historical figures and settings set in video games and other things like pieces of fiction, video games, that stuff.
Like I think we're mention that I have to mention all the Paradox games I've ever played, except for Stellaris. All the other ones, yeah, just because they're based in history, you tend to run into a lot of historical figures wondering how the hell did you get here?
President's Day doesn't need to celebrate the current president in our country, right? We couldn't if we tried. Some people have tried to celebrate that. Much to other people's ire, and it doesn't seem to go over.
Mostly he tries.
But we are... Man, trying to separate ourselves from a very political holiday while simultaneously leaning into it.
Political figures. Yes, we're talking. Well, I'm not talking about nothing but historical political figures.
We're going to talk about history now. We are no longer going to talk about
We shall no
current events.
Yes.
So, the elephant in the room, which we have to talk about if we're talking about historical settings and figures in video games, is Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed kind of made this big.
Yeah.
Kind of in the way that Game of Thrones made the mortality thing big in current games. Assassin's Creed has made historical settings really popular again.
Yep. With actually decent and paying attention to decent history, amazingly enough.
Well, and
with some differences. I'm pretty sure the Pope was not actually fighting an assassin at the top of the
Blade's comments great, but we said we're not going to talk about it. But
that's no need to insult the lore axis.
So the thing Assassin's Creed did really well was historical accuracy.
Again, amazingly, yes.
The thing that I think they've not done well going forward is regurgitation. So I think that's a great way to talk about what it does well and what using historical figures and settings does well in your book, and what it why you might also lean away from it, what you need to do in addition to it.
Yeah.
You like robot George Washington. George Washington, yes, in BioShock Infinity.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah. BioShock Infinite's
that's actually BioShock in general is actually something that I think does this really well. I will transition to that in a moment. That's a good point though, Pat.
Yeah.
But Assassin's Creed, they got it right with Assassin's Creed 2. They did really well with Assassin's Creed 1, going back to Altair and ancient Jerusalem. It was focused in Jerusalem.
It was the Holy Land. It was Tyre, Jerusalem, and one or two other cities. I want to say I don't remember exactly what they were.
And the historical setting was great.
Yeah, I don't know if any of the figures were historical. I don't actually know much about that region.
And I think the thing that got it really off the ground was that in addition to a great setting, it had good gameplay, and it had original gameplay. It was the first real third-person melee stealth, like medieval stealth game.
Yeah.
Made you feel like like an assassin, like a historical assassin, not just the common. We use the word assassin every day now.
Right. Definitely.
And then, Assassin's Creed 2 did it even better.
Yeah, it dropped you off in the middle of medieval Italy, and it threw you up against the Borgias. So not only are you smack dab in the middle of Italian politics, you're smack dab in the middle of the most cutthroat Italian politics around.
Well, and you're in the Vatican. You're adjacent to the Vatican.
You're in the Vatican. You're in the major cities of Italy. You're seeing the historical buildings as they were. You meet Leonardo da Vinci, for God's sakes, which was awesome.
It was absolutely awesome. And the thing that does really wonderfully is it sets up a framework for you. Because you're set there and you immediately have a connection to these people, even if you're not part of, that country.
Yeah.
You ask Americans about how much world history they're taught. Not enough.
Yeah, you at least know a general concept of what it is you're looking at. It's like, okay, we have basic gunpowder, we have a couple of grenades, everyone's trying to kill everybody. Got it.
Well, and it gives you a sense of scale. When you're meeting Leonardo da Vinci, you know that you're not one of the common folk. You're sitting among giants.
Yeah, you're talking to important,
they don't need to do anything else to tell you that.
Right. And when you start running into other people that are important to the actual story of the game, you realize that, wait, these are actually important people. Okay.
And that as itself is great, but it works as a framework. You need more to fill it. The reason that Assassin's Creed 2 still worked so well and continues to work so well today is because Ubisoft was still doing something new. It was only the second installment in the franchise.
Yep.
The gameplay was still fresh.
Yep, they hadn't done the same game a dozen times over by this point.
Well, and that's the thing. As it goes on, both fan and critical reviews go down steeply because they began to just rehash and reuse.
Yeah.
It's not an instant win button using historical.
And the thing about, and the other nice thing about about dealing with the Italian situation was you were running into important people, but you weren't, palling around with and you can meet up and influence important people, but you weren't just running into every important person around.
Right.
Which was, when I tried to play Assassin's Creed 3, that was the issue I ran into. It was like, oh, hey, Mr. Historical Figure I know from my history books. Look, are we going to fit everyone in here? Do we have to fit everyone in here?
But, that's the thing. They could have. I actually thought Assassin's Creed was still pretty cool. But when you're trying to shoehorn it while ignoring the gameplay around it, it just got really underwhelming.
Right.
And I think the same thing happens with fiction, with shows, with prose. You go to Legends of Tomorrow, the current DC comic book show that's running. They're all about time hopping and seeing figures in history.
Right.
And I mean, that concept itself, it's not the first time it's been done, but it's pretty cool. But their first season kind of tanked. It was popular enough to get a second season, but a lot of critical review went downhill about it because the framework was interesting, but the inner character relationships just weren't there. The dialogue was off.
Right.
And you need more things to back it up.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to go back to the time of the Revolutionary War and meet George Washington, but if that's all you got,
Right.
Give me something else here, guys.
Pat says he likes now Jan Hus in Kingdom Come Deliverance. I do not.
I have not played it. I know nothing about that game.
Do you know who Jan Hus is?
Not familiar with the name.
Me either.
Sounds Eastern. Hi.
Tell us about it, and we'll touch on that.
Yep.
I'll
freely admit that my Eastern European and Eastern history is pretty bad.
So,
unless it's Russian, that's a whole other story.
So anytime you're doing historical context, it's like any other hot button word. You need to have a point to it.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll probably hit on that point every week. That'll be something we say every week.
It all depends on the execution.
But, since we get that out of the way, how can you use it as a really good tool?
Well, there's a couple different ways to go about it. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to tell a cool story, you can then grabbing an interesting historical period, especially one that hasn't been done to death. At this point, especially if you're American, trying to do one on the American Revolution isn't going to get you very far, especially post Hamilton. Come on, seriously. Well, and I'm sure every other country has their own time periods that are just done to death. So picking a time period that hasn't been done a million times over helps. But the biggest thing you can do is pick a time period where the time period itself helps complement the story you're trying to tell. If you're trying to have a political point, pick a time period that fits that political period. If you're trying to talk about issues involving different groups having major political struggles, any civil war will usually cover that pretty well. I think that's the most obvious.
Well, and especially if you're trying to make a point of reminding why that war happened.
Right.
But moreover, that's what to do, but why do we do it? I will transition here over to Pat's point about BioShock Infinite with George Washington and all of the BioShocks.
You think there was a little social commentary there, good sir?
There was but it's really well done.
Yeah,
because
one of the other things you can do is you can use history to help showcase issues in the world that you're seeing today.
Well, and let's take BioShock for that.
Yeah.
If you take BioShock doesn't have to happen in a historical context.
Mm.
It can be.
In fact, BioShock generally takes place on what could almost be considered an alternate universe, but it's one with a similar history to ours.
But it doesn't even need that.
No.
You could make a completely sci-fi presentation for this just using Ayn Rand principles.
Oh yeah.
It's been done before,
but that's not what they went with.
Right?
Especially with BioShock Infinite, they threw in the context of with late 1800s, early 1900s America, and the issues we were having with our own race relations there, because well, it makes the greatest context for, or not even necessarily contrast, just better context for shit that's happening in today's world.
Yeah,
like it's an exact the stuff that happened back then is an exaggerated is not technically happening today, but well. There are still similarities.
And, if you take that historical context out of BioShock, it's still a great game, but I don't think it gets talked about today.
No, it doesn't have quite the same impact.
Because they have to put more time into explaining their message to you.
Right. Like in the case of BioShock Infinite, they just bring up the massacre of Wounded Knee, and immediately you're like, oh. It's that kind of situation.
If you know it, yeah,
you're just
definitely.
Shit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they've knocked down an entire 2 scenes of explanation to one sentence.
Yeah. And especially when some of the characters start describing it as the Battle of Wounded Knee, you're like, wait, no, oh, that's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah,
got it.
Gotcha.
We hear you.
We don't have a fully American chat group, so Wounded Knee.
Wounded Knee was a massacre of Native Americans by U.S. soldiers, 1890s, I believe.
Yep.
Basically, a group of Indians were surrendering, I believe they were either surrendering or trading with the Americans. Things got ugly, and the entire group ended up getting slaughtered by the American soldiers.
And it was
a mess, to put it bluntly, to put it mildly.
It's very twitchy.
Yes, it's the kind of thing that if it gets brought up now, still provokes bad feelings among some people, just because for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm. And you get that impact of that in your story.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the massacre of Wounded Knee, and some of the characters in BioShock start describing it as a battle, your immediate response, if you know anything about it, your immediate response is that wasn't a battle at all. There's no way to describe that as a battle.
Yeah. So. That in mind, like, what's some of your favorite uses of historical figures?
I think I got to go back to Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. It's one of the book. It is one of the dumbest concepts for a book I've ever heard in my life, and it's still one of the better books I've ever read. Go figure that out.
Well, and that's using it in a totally different way. That's completely switching how we use our historical figures.
Yeah, that is taking a historical figure, sticking fairly straight to the details of his life, except for the vampires. Everything not vampire related is actually pretty accurate.
Wait, you didn't realize that was a true release of X-Files?
I will dump this on your head.
It's probably lukewarm by now.
Yeah. But and then just throwing in something completely off the wall, and then mixing it with completely accurate, well, as accurate as you can get, history, and just that contradiction is just so weird and so unusual. And while I've seen other authors attempt the same thing, I've never quite seen it done as well as the first book did.
Well, and I think it's good to point out that that this can be done in different ways, because like we're talking about historical figures and how they can hammer in a point in a sentence, what other books need to do in chapters.
Oh yeah.
But
or you could do it, or you could just go completely off the wall and say, "I'm just doing something completely interesting with this."
Well, or like just the dichotomy of expectation and what happens can just leave you on the floor laughing. It's one of my favorites I've heard described to me. I never found the book, but it was during the Crusades, and it was an alternate history, and it's where an alien spaceship comes down during the Crusades.
Oh, gods.
And longbowmen and knights and everyone line up around the ship, and one of the one of the aliens comes out, and they're used to doing this. They fire a gun, and everyone gets scared and surrenders right away. And so they aim a phaser at one of the civilians and fire, and the civilian disintegrates. And everyone's worried, but one of the trained bowmen immediately looses an arrow. The aliens, having not had an actual fight in centuries, have terrible tactics and get overrun.
Oh,
and
gods.
The Crusaders just take over the ship and begin using their technology to, basically run the world. And that's just a hilarious concept. And you don't get that wonderful punch without knowing, how brutal the era was.
Oh no, someone died. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't give a shit.
Um,
We're used to that.
So I think one of my favorite uses of historical characters in fictional contexts, and I got this question about why you use it, if it was necessary to use the characters. And I think it's actually going to go to a manga, because if I'm going this route, I have no choice but to go Japanese. Because, Nobunaga Oda and Hattori Hanzo have been used so many times in anime and fiction.
Yeah.
And they're really interesting figures if you delve into it.
That's definitely true.
Hattori Hanzo, for anyone who doesn't know, was actual ninja spy master in...
If you think of the stereotypical ninja, this is the guy who actually qualifies for the job description.
Well, except yes and no, because he's one of the people who helped cultivate these misconceptions about ninja, because it made his job easier. When he networked out his spies, having the idea that they were these magical entities was insanely useful.
Definitely.
But he's hugely... he's hugely influential to fiction today.
Naturally.
Despite what he did or did not do in history, which, considering the fact that he was a huge propaganda artist, probably didn't
Who the hell knows
do as much as he did. But Nobunaga Oda also was a fierce, vicious warlord from Japan's history.
And that's not, and for the record, the title warlord is not applying a modern spin to that. That was literally what he was.
Yes.
He was a daimyo.
He was a daimyo. He was... he ruled through military might.
Yeah.
He is attributed with a lot of crimes against humanity.
Burning temples, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But he was effective. He held power. His dynasty held power for years. Dynasty is the wrong word. His family.
Yeah.
But he is... He pops up in anime a lot. Pat says he likes history characters and drifters. He shows up there.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Oda Nobunaga is kind of depending on your politics, he can be hero or villain depending on how you feel like playing him, or just
almost always villain. I would say.
Yeah, I can imagine why.
But he, what the series I went with was Samurai Deeper, which is a wonderful manga, terrible anime. If you've seen the anime, ignore what you've said and what you've seen and listen to me now. Samurai Deeper is actually a very supernatural shonen anime. It's very action-based. It's not very reality-based. But you keep seeing these historical figures from the Warring States period pop up, along with along with Nobunaga Oda, along with I cannot remember his name for the life of me.
There were a lot of guys.
There were a lot of guys,
especially during the Warring States period. Good God.
Yes.
I don't know, Tokugawa.
Yes. Tokugawa.
The guy who eventually won.
And some of the princes and other people, and they keep showing up, and a lot of them are actually out of historical place. Like, these people shouldn't be existing at the same time.
Where's the fun in that?
But the thing is, they don't try to make it historically based.
Right.
And this is something that is, again, counter to Assassin's Creed and counter to everything else we were talking about, where they accept this and they don't focus on it. They just use it as a framework to show you what you're messing with.
Yeah, and there's essentially two ways you can go about that. You can either go historically based, you can go historically accurate, which will keep the history nerds happy. Or you can go off the wall, just picking and choosing characters and places you want to use, and just not worrying about the overall historical period because you're trying to do your own thing. And that's good too. Don't try to mix and match the two. That will not go well for you.
No.
It's like the regular people will be confused, and the history nerds will get pissed off.
And you pick something and you stick with it. Is the basic thing here.
Oh yeah. No matter what style
it's kind of... So, in a weird way, we were talking about our campaign settings the other week, and I picked solar travel using magic. Science, fantasy without the science. And I got the question when I was describing this to my girlfriend, why I decided to stick with our solar system. Why not just make it a completely fantasy setting? And I decided, this is when I really started thinking about this, about the framing of it. It's because I want that sense of scale. You know, with science fiction, it gets so easy to lose yourself in light years and AU and
it becomes very easy to lose track of what it is you're looking at. It becomes it's because unless even with an actual map or everything you do, it's really hard to get a scale of something you have never actually seen or experienced. It's hard for a person to get an idea of a brand new solar system. But when you describe our solar system, people immediately know what you're talking about.
And even if I switch up, the topography of the planets, because they're not livable, if I make them more fantastical, letting you know that this is Venus, it's an actual distance away from Earth. It's,
and it just gives people a reference. Oh, okay, it's Venus, but it's a different Venus. Okay, I immediately get that.
And it gives you a sense of scale at the same time. Yeah. It's not, plane jumping. It's not something you have to construct out of your head. It's actual, old school radio science fiction drama.
Oh, yeah. It cuts down on the amount of work that the writer has to do, and it seriously cuts down on the amount of imagination the reader has to do.
And exactly, it can help enhance the imagination of what the reader does as well. But, when you're talking about amount of work that the writer has to do, cutting down on that is good. It's not about being a lazy writer. No, it's about getting your message across to the reader in as short a time as possible.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how creative you are. If your audience has no idea what the hell you're talking about, you have failed.
And if you've taken 3 chapters to tell your audience what you're talking about, you've failed as well. The average reader, I would say, gives 1 chapter, 2 chapters maybe, to a book to decide if they like it. I've heard other, more professional people say they give 5 pages or something like that. But I would say the average reader gives 1 chapter.
Yeah, and
average show watchers will watch the pilot and maybe another episode.
Yeah.
And all of these tools, you really need to cut down how much you're explaining to the audience. Because you can bore them.
Yeah. At the end of the day, explanations are boring.
Yes. Show, don't tell.
Exactly.
It's the golden rule of writing.
Oh, yeah. And while you can definitely go, and all there are times you definitely need to go against that rule, because there's no way around it or it works better. There are times where that's true. You don't want to do it too much. And you do not want to, here's the thing. If George R.R. Martin had started off with a long-winded explanation of how the Game of Thrones world worked, no one would have given a shit.
Yeah, no.
No one cares. No one, at the end, it's one of the best things. I was listening to a writer who was talking about fantasy, and she described it basically as 90% of the details you create your fantasy world with, your audience does not care about.
I remember as a kid, I wrote a series because I've been writing forever. And I wrote a few chapters of a book, and within the first 3 chapters, I explained all the rules of magic. I look back on that and I cringe.
Oh yeah, I've done the same thing where I spend days upon days crafting a world, and at this point, I don't do that anymore. I craft the story, and then the world builds itself up around it as I need it.
That was the most difficult thing about writing down the adventures of our campaign, because the campaign setting that we did first, I think it's still my favorite setting I've ever done. Just that pantheon of gods. But it was this real interesting take on a D&D world where the monsters ran the world rather than the humans. The humans were not powerful enough to fight back, so they spent a lot of time kind of running from shelter to shelter, finding ways to fight back at monsters. And eventually you guys got powerful enough to fight back.
Yeah, it's almost post-apocalyptic without the apocalypse.
It's actually It's right, like, it's post-apocalyptic if the apocalypse happened before the creation of humanity.
Yeah.
It's like pre-civilization. And those lines got blurred, but like I already had a pantheon for this world, my favorite pantheon I've ever done. The god of chaos still torments him. But
if you're wondering why, you've never woken up in a mushroom before, wondering what the hell happened to the reality.
You didn't wonder what happened to reality. You woke up in your mushroom and you went to the stone quarry.
The player was wondering what the hell just happened the entire freaking time.
One of the characters decided to fly while they were in the realm of chaos with the chaos god. He decided to fly by bluffing gravity. And it worked.
Yeah. Although what's hilarious is another time another character tried to exploit the rules, and he just said, "Why would that work?" Because it's chaotic, not stupid.
True randomness is never predictable. But one of the biggest hurdles I've had to writing that down, because I would love to write that at some point, is that I already know everything about the world and I want to get it out onto the page right away.
But the audience doesn't need to know that.
And I should make another attempt at writing that series, but
and to bring it back to the historical period, that's one of the nice things about using historical period is you can use the audience's own knowledge about the time period to just build off that.
Yeah.
Oh, you already know about the Revolutionary War? I don't need to explain that then. We could just
Pat says like pre-human revolution. That's a great way to describe it. But yeah,
or if you're in England during the time of the Jack the Ripper. Okay, if you know anything about the time period, you immediately got the general gist. Got it. I can just go from there. I don't need to have as much explained. I can just build up from there.
Jack the Ripper is one of those that always shows up.
I swear.
Him and
he was in Star Trek, for God's sakes.
Oh yeah, no, completely. But him and to a lesser degree, but in a similar vein, the mobster, Al Capone.
Yeah, it's like Jack the Ripper, Al Capone, and George Washington, Abraham Lincoln.
They show up so many places, and sometimes effectively, sometimes not. But you can get a real idea for where a story's heading.
I will say I like some of the stuff that Doctor Who does with the historical figures they run into.
Doctor Who is great for it.
Oh yeah, I still love the episode with Vince Van Gogh. That was great.
Yes. So Doctor Who is a little too hit and miss to actually talk about in this segment, because we get really good instances and really bad instances. But if you want a piece of great television, watch the Van Gogh episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Or anything written by Neil Gaiman, but those are generally futuristic, not historical.
Yeah, although if you want to read anything good, just read Neil Gaiman. That's generally good advice.
That's generally good advice.
I've literally never read anything bad by him.
Well, my coffee is about done.
Mine's already done.
Yours is already done? So we should start wrapping this up. We are going to transition over into a board game today. We're trying to do one tabletop stream a month is basically the idea. I like this framing us at the couch rather than at the. I think so. Also keeps us a little more focused on the conversation. We're not. I try to shout out to people in the chat, but at the same time, I want to be talking.
Right.
So I think this is good. I think we're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna set up
just two gamers on the couch, like a stereotypical webcomic.
Yeah, I would love that. Well, and if we ever get a guest on here, we can grill them right here. So, what are your opinions? But we're gonna play Spirit Island. It's a game by Greater Than Games, the same makers of Sentinels of the Multiverse.
Which means you should
but
own
it's
it.
completely different. But it's not like Sentinels,
It
except
isn't.
in the way that it's a character-based game.
Yeah.
But it's a board game rather than a card game, mostly. And it's, I don't know, it's really interesting. You're playing as the ancient spirits of an island pre-colonial times, and as the
Trying to kick the colonists off.
exactly, colonists are coming to the island, and you playing as the ancient spirits that haunt the island, and as the natives are trying to run off all colonial attempts.
Yep, it even comes with 3 scenarios involving 3 colonial powers: England, Prussia, and
France,
I think, is the other one.
Yeah. So stick around for that, but we still need to talk about what our assignment for next week is.
Yes, teacher, we have homework.
I always set up the homework. You want to set up the homework this week? I can set up the homework if you want, and
Sure.
you can take next week.
That works.
Okay. So for this week, since we talked about historical figures in historical contexts, I think we'll do something similar to what we did for our campaign settings.
Okay.
Pick a historical context and use it in a campaign setting. Now, I think, knowing us, we do a lot of historical recreation. We do SCA, which is medieval recreation group. And we do a lot of stuff with that. I think that actually means that we should focus away from historically accurate. I think that we should set this as a fantasy, be it urban fantasy, be it medieval fantasy.
Okay.
A fantasy setting that uses historical figures.
Okay.
Set that up. It has to feature a historical figure, not just a setting in general.
Gotcha. Okay.
And bring a campaign right up. I think I will probably try and present a piece of short fiction on this.
Okay.
We both write, so why not actually start presenting stuff?
Right.
Before we go, let's check the chat.
Hi,
Pat
chat.
says, also I want to ask, did you miss your Jan Hus explanation, or did it not come? It did not come.
Yeah.
We did not see it.
Yeah.
If you want to send that to us now, unless it was on Discord, which I don't have access to Discord right now, because we're unplugging as we're plugging. That's what we forgot to do. We forgot to be shameless. Yeah, I'm Crowy42. I'm the streamer. I'm the channel that we're going on right now. So if you like my stuff...
Let's be honest, he's the reason you're here.
Hey, guys. No, if you like my stuff, go ahead, hit follow, hit subscribe, whatever you want to do. Hang around here, grab a seat, grab a hat, grab a drink, enjoy yourself. It looks like Pat's sending us the explanation. I will go over that in a second.
Yes.
You are Michael Dennis.
Or Heladon. I'm an independent fantasy writer and blogger. I blog every week. I write 2 series. I have the Gathering of the Shadow series, a fantasy series based in a city set against the backdrop of a plague, and the Urban Cohort series, a series about a group of superheroes. Think Young Justice type stuff. Both are available on Amazon.
God damn, we talked entirely about historical
And we
settings
did not want you-
backdrops, and
and
you
we did
didn't
not-
even talk about your series.
No.
I'm a terrible friend because I haven't got into this yet. But, I should do that this weekend. You said, the way you were describing them, they seem like pretty quick reads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
go check him out. He's on Amazon. He's an independent author.
Yep, they're on Amazon. If you have Kindle Prime, they are free for read. They are part of the Kindle Prime Kindle Unlimited series system.
Follow Patreon and...
Yes, and I also have a Patreon account. which will have updates and things going on for all the stuff I got to deal with. So,
And we will hopefully come with kind of a release schedule for the series coming up here soon.
that would be nice.
Hopefully.
Yes.
It all depends. You're also looking at work right now, so
Yes.
work can always get in the way of doing things. Heledon as in Heledon.
Yes.
Let's see. So, Jan Hus is a priest from Czech Republic, so I'm betting it's Jan. He was like that main the main subsection of Christianity. Hussites.
Oh yeah, okay. Hussites and the Bohemian Reformation.
Yes. Okay.
Gotcha.
Shouldn't pay to do stuff in church. At church, the priest will drink wine, other people will eat bread, and Jan Hus was like, everybody should drink wine, and then he was invited to share his beliefs to the Pope. He only had one requirement, to not get killed by them. He got to the Pope, he talked, and he was burned alive. And then the Hussites' war started, and in Kingdom Come, he was represented pretty comedically.
Yeah.
I mean, that description sounds dark comedy.
Yeah. It's like I could see a dark comedy involving this guy. Good lord.
Alb asks what today's block is about. Today's writer's block was about historical settings in pieces of fiction. So, like Assassin's Creed style was the main talking point, but using actual historical figures in pieces of fiction and gaming, and we talked about our favorite parts. I talked about a manga. You talked about something. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter.
Yes.
We went completely opposite sides with this, which is wonderful about the stuff we talk about. We actually had this discussion that we want to not hit on broad topics. We want to hit on specifics. And it turns out you can't swing a cat without hitting a broad topic. We try and hit very specific instances, and we're like, well, it gets used in this context, and it gets used in this context, and there's this middle line.
Yeah, welcome to Talking to Writers. I'm surprised writers' conferences aren't just 10 hours of writers just talking to each other about random things.
Croco Coffee, yeah, you missed it. I'm sorry, dude. We just finished talking, but it will be put up on YouTube and at this time tomorrow.
Yes.
My Twitch agreement says I can't put it on YouTube before that, but I will get it highlighted and put on YouTube if you want to go check it out, along with the rest of our stuff. I think we'll start doing official releases of this next week. This has been like a 4-episode test run.
Yeah, we're still hammering out the kinks in this.
But I think I like the chat. I like the couch chat. And
yeah.
I think we've picked out everything.
I will say it hasn't been very kinky, so there you go. My sense of humor does not get above puns, so.
What? Alb says don't do that to Squeak. I don't know what we did to Squeak. Bye, Squeak. Now is going to be a tabletop RPG. Yep. Well, not RPG. Tabletop board game.
Yes.
We're doing
Spirit Island Day.
Spirit Island.
Yes.
So stick around for that. We will be back in probably 15 minutes. The stream is going to go offline so that we can reset. Part of that is so that I can get the YouTube video up earlier tomorrow. Because the paperwork says that I can't... It's not... Like, I can't upload an hour of a stream the hour that it was published. I have to wait until the entire stream is ended. So, like, if we continued on without a break, it wouldn't be until, whenever we finish, like 6 or 7 tomorrow. This way, I can just upload it when I finish tomorrow.
There you go.
But, yeah. We are going to do...
Clever girl.
Oh, we talked about swinging a cat. We wouldn't swing Squeak.
No,
Probably.
No. Besides the phrase to swing a dead cat.
Yes. Squeak is not dead. She makes that very clear every day. Meow. Hi. Okay, but we're gonna go get set up for the tabletop board game. Thank you guys for hanging around. I highly recommend watching this game. This game is awesome.
This game is awesome. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm
a big fan of this one.
it'll be interesting playing it with 2 players. But we're gonna get that started.
Yep. See you guys in 15 minutes or so.
Indeed. Thank you guys for hanging out. Until I see you next time, this is Corey42, and this is Heladon.
Have a good one, folks.
Signing out. Be sure to keep it random, guys.